today's session we'll be looking at a specific aspect of head of the family, and that is the file specific par values option. So as in all cases with head of the family, we will first want to do a scan of a family or multiple families. So let's just initialize our file, and we'll then say list family details, and we're going with the absolute bare minimum here as far as details go. This will be a much faster process than listing type parameters and reporting on null values. So we'll just say process current, and we've now generated some information in our report file. So if I open that up quickly, we'll see that we have a bit of information about the family, and in this case we've got two lots of door types, or two types for this particular family. We've got some subcategory information and some material information. The critical things that we care about here is just the two type entries. Okay, we'll just close that file now. We don't need to save it off. So we've now done our scan, and what we want to do now is generate an Excel file that will let us control parameters within files based on their types or just families as a whole. Let's just click on the used button here. We'll say regenerate and edit data, and we've got three options here. Now let's just try going through the three options, and we'll say files only to begin with. We'll go OK, and in this case we wind up with a control file that will affect this particular family, the CU32016 family, and all types will be affected. And we could go to this field then and say, alright, we want to affect the URL field, and we'll go www.arss.com.au, save this off, and now when we process this particular family, we'll wind up setting the URL of all the types to that value. So we'll close that off. We'll transfer our used file across to the control file. Always an important step, and we'll just say overwrite it in this case. We've got the option to append it, but in this case we want to overwrite that file. We'll now enable that, and once I enable that, you'll see that these two fields or checkboxes are highlighted in green, and all of the other fields for updating become greyed out. That's because when we're doing this sort of update, we can only run the file specific parameter values rather than running all of the other things at the same time. Okay, so at this point we'll just press process current, and you'll see now that it reports that URL has been set to arss.com.au in both the type 1 and type 2 families. And if I now go to the types for the family and scroll down here, you'll see that we've had arss.com.au set appropriately. If we wanted to now, we could go into that control file and we could include the manufacturer field. So let's just do that quickly. Back into head of the family, and we'll now just open the control file. And we'll put in manufacturer. And this is where it's important that you spell things correctly. So the disadvantage of this particular approach is that you in fact have to type in the parameters exactly correctly. What we'll look at in a short while is how we can get all of these parameters much more readily available to us. So we'll save that off. We'll say process current. And you'll see now that we've also updated the manufacturer value as well as the URL values. So once again, we'll just go into the create to make sure that it's doing what we want. And you'll see manufacturer is now set to AR Software Solutions for both Type 1 and Type 2. So let's just go back into head of the family. And we'll disable updating at this point. Now, in our first run, all we had checked was list family details. So that's going to do a fairly quick output of information about families. As you saw, it only had the types in it, some category information and some material information. If we want type parameters to be listed as well in our scan, we could check this text box or check this checkbox, and what will happen then is we'll get type parameters exported out to our report file. However, this will only export out values or parameters that have a value. So if the manufacturer, for example, was set to nothing, that manufacturer parameter would not be reported on unless we tick this report null values checkbox. So we'll tick that, we'll initialize the report again, and we'll now say process current. And this is generating a report file that has much more information. It's got all of the parameters in it, the values of the parameters. If I open that report, you'll see that now we have the main family parameters. So the ones that apply to the entire family. And then further down, we've got detailed type parameters, which relate to a specific type, shows it's a built-in parameter, what the name of it is, and what the current value is. So, and you'll see that we have a number of null values. If we hadn't checked that null report null values checkbox, we wouldn't have had these parameters listed here. So we'll just cancel out of that. And we'll uncheck the disable updating so that we've got access back here. If I now go to used, and I'll say regenerate and edit the data, because I want it to go back and scan through that report. In this case, we can now have full access to all of these. And if I go to Files, Family Types and All Parameters, you'll see the difference that we achieve. So we now get presented with a list of possible parameters, and we'll include description. We already have model URL, fire rating, manufacturer. So we've now picked a series of parameters to be reported on. And if I click OK, then you'll see now we've got our two types and we've got our description listed here at the top shows that description is a built-in parameter and it's a text parameter. The critical part is description. We're just getting a bit more information about those particular parameters. So I can put 1 hour here, 2 hours there, my door type 1. I'll just save that off. Now remember, that was our used file, so we just transfer that across to the control file, and I'll just say overwrite. And if I opened that file, you'd see that it now has what we just did. And I can say process current. And you'll see that it's set things, fire rating to 1 hour, fire rating to 2 hours. So we'll just say done. And if we now exit out of that, we can look at this and type 2. And here you can now see we've got my door type 2 with a 2-hour fire rating. Okay, there's just one last thing to make mention of, and that is the family specific par values. So they're the values that you find typically when you go to the family category and parameters. So we've got things like always vertical, the omni class number. So you may decide that you want to implement omni class numbers, and that will probably be much easier to do using this particular function within head of the families. So we'll just cancel out of that, back into head of the family. We'll click on our used button, we'll regenerate it, and we can now select whichever parameters we want to use. We'll just go OK. And we've now got our used control file as such, and it shows that this particular family file has always vertical set to 1 and the omni class number set to that. Let's just change always vertical to 0. We'll save that off. We'll transfer that across and tick that one, and we'll just say process current. Alright, so it's updated parameter always vertical to 0. And if we go to our thing here, you'll see that we've always vertical is now turned off. So as you can see, using the file specific parameter settings within ARUtils head of the family, you can control families very easily on a one-by-one basis, each type having different values and all visible in an Excel file. So that makes setting all of those values much easier, and you get a fantastic overview of what's happening with your families and then applying updates to all your families. Hope you've learnt something here. As you saw throughout this session, I tended to work just with one family to begin with. I would, of course, typically then go on to scanning, processing the list so that I scan all of the families. It's just much faster to first test a single family and then move on to doing multiple families. Thank you for your time today.